The key point not to be lost with capitalism or capitalist society is the root term, which is capital. And the key point with capital is that it's a social relation. With capital, there's a class dynamic of, to use the Marxist terms, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And this relation is more complicated and dynamic as compared to relations of master and slaves or lords and serfs. A comparison between these relations allows for an interesting spot to discuss a problem arising from capitalism being defined as private ownership, even over the means of production, and even farther over land, resources, etc. A theoretical or a semantic distinction could be made, with private as opposed to individual property, which will be discussed in a minute. However, even the fact that a distinction must be made is an imitation and misinterpretation and an indication of lack of clarity. In feudal and slave relations, individual ownership exists, of land, means of production, resources, etc. There is also the relation between workers and laborers, or owners and workers. The distinction between those two is of ownership of land in the case of feudal and slave ownership. One could easily attempt to conclude that the distinguishing factor would rest on the latter. That is, in a capitalist relation, there is no ownership over workers. However, that is also the case in feudal society. A historical point can be made as to why America, as opposed to Europe, specifically Great Britain, developed capital and industrial revolution more slowly, and why they had slaves to begin with. It was in part due to the fact that in America, your own land was a couple of dead natives away, at least for the colonizers. In Europe, which was occupied by Europeans for some time in history, moving all the way to America would be your closest escape. In America, it was necessary to tie down the workers with ownership, specifically African slaves, because the workers weren't inherently tied down by political and geographic history. And also, having to move from a society established on the ownership of individuals takes a harder transition. But back to the point, how is capital distinguished from other examples of relations of production? With capitalism being defined as a society where the dominant social relation is capital, another way to phrase the question would be, what does it take for a society to be past the point of capital becoming the dominant relation? Well, the capitalist relation is one that takes place through the value-creating process of producing and selling commodities, with a class relationship existing wherein the workers' production done for society is mediated through an owning class. Thus, a capitalist society can be defined as a society existing with this class relationship, where value, measured in money usually, is created through the process of producing and exchanging, again for money, commodities, which is done in a generalized fashion. That is, where commodities are mass-produced or goods and services are produced socially as opposed to individually or part of small groups. And thus, capital, prior to being the dominant in society, is the same process without the production of commodities being done generally, and a pre-capitalist society or a developing capitalist society is one where that relationship exists, to whatever extent, along with other relations like feudal relations and slave relations, etc., still having a significant hold over society overall, with varying degrees of significance equaling varying progressive stages of capitalism.